Today, an Emirates flight from Dubai was scheduled to land at the King Shaka International Airport. Reports suggest that due to regulations released by the South African government earlier in the week, Emirates Airlines has with immediate effect cancelled all international flights in and out of Durban. That happened yesterday. eNCA reported Dasen Thathiah is at King Shaka International Airport and brings us that story. Dasen, what effect has the clarification by the Department of Transport on these regulations had on whether or not Emirates will reinstate flights going forward?
Well, it sounds like this particular incident now is relating to this very flight, and once there's clarity on exactly how those regulations will work or how it will be put into effect in regards to the crew on these flights, there might be some change in that. And those at the King Shaka International Airport have told us that it's not necessarily that there's a cancellation of that route or anything like that. It is just regarding this particular flight. But you know, I must just reflect, this sounds very similar to me like the other day when we were at the Gulela border post, and it seems like some of these regulations that have been now enforced have not translated into the down to the grassroots level, and that's what happened there, where truck drivers were stopped, and it sounds like a similar thing, but this time on the air side. So let me bring into the conversation now the general manager of the King Shaka International Airport, that's Terence Delamani. Mr. Delamani, thanks for joining me. As I was just explaining now around the Emirates flight that should have landed at about 1 o'clock, we know that didn't happen because of the cancellation. But surely it all sounds a little bit last minute, like maybe bad communication. But what's the actual reason as to why this had to happen?
Dasen, no, thank you. I know it's really an inconvenience for passengers and the industry at large. However, I think we must bear in mind that everything is fairly new. You know, we've just started level 1 on the 1st of October. Today would have been our first international flight. So I think the entire industry is sort of getting accustomed to the regulations. And in this particular case, and the particular regulation that we're looking at is how crew are screened and the regulations around that. And obviously, Emirates that was supposed to fly into Durban, as you said, at 1 o'clock. There were challenges in how they would actually comply to that regulation, bearing in mind that safety is paramount. So rather be safe and rather make sure that we are able to comply. So in the event that we're unable to comply, the airline was unfortunately had to cancel this flight. But I think I'd like to emphasize it's not a cancellation of the route. It's this particular flight, and we are very hopeful that the matter can be resolved.
Mr. Delamani, I have to ask this. You know, it sounds like when these regulations were drafted, one would imagine that all of these parties would have been consulted, including the airports and the airlines and so on and so forth. What has been AXA's role in those negotiations in ensuring that these are the regulations that we need to adhere to?
No, for sure. I think we must bear in mind, though, that AXA has to comply to the regulations as laid out by the SA Civil Aviation Authority. So yes, we actually do a lot of work with the industry, with our regulator, with the Department of Health to understand how these regulations are going to come into effect. But essentially, we are reliant on the regulations that are put forward by the Department of Health, and they again are reliant on what the World Health Organization is putting forward. So our role is really, we're an implementation agent. We help to ensure that there's compliance. Obviously, we give input into these regulations because whatever we do, we need to ensure that we can practically implement it. Does it make sense? Because sometimes, you have a regulation on paper that looks great, but to practically implement it is really a challenge. So certainly we do play that role. We give input, but essentially we are reliant on the authorities that are responsible for that to actually create the regulation.
So in certain respects, your hands are tied. I know that there's another flight that's going to be landing probably in the next hour or so. That's the Qatar flight. So how would that be different, and how is that flight managing to land, and how will that crew be coming into the airport?
So listen, what would happen, as I said, each airline would then determine how they would comply. Obviously, the airline that's flying, which is Qatar, and we're quite grateful for that, to have our first international flight back, would have implemented a process that allows them to comply, and essentially they are able then to come into Durban. In the case of the other airline, they're looking at other issues and obviously trying to deal with the matter so that they could eventually fly into Durban.
And just quickly as we wrap, what does this now mean for your international routes? You used to have about 7 airlines that used to fly here to King Shaka. Now we've had the cancellation of Emirates on this flight. You've got Qatar. Is there anything else planned, or what other flights or should we be seeing the next week or so?
Obviously, Dasen, as I said, this is pretty new. I think airlines need time to plan their routes. At this point in time, it's Emirates and Qatar that are now reintroduced into Durban. As we're seeing, Qatar is flying today. The next flight for Emirates was due on Thursday. So Emirates was going to fly into Durban 3 times a week. We are hoping this matter can be resolved before then. Then we'd actually then see the reintroduction of Emirates. In terms of the other airlines, again, it's a process. You know, those airlines would now need to understand their planning, their route planning, do their feasibilities, and as we discuss with them, we are hoping that they will come back sooner rather than later.
Thank you very much, Mr. Delamani. Andli, it sounds like the clock is ticking because the next Emirates flight is due here by Thursday. So hopefully there is those negotiations do go well and there is some kind of resolution that can be reached to ensure that that flight actually lands here.
Well, thank you very much for that, Dasen Thathiah. And just to update our viewers, we have there in the interim received clarification from the Department of Transport saying that crew members who do not have that PCR test will still be allowed to enter the country, but they will be required to quarantine at their hotel.